Every year, countless people disappear across Australia. Many are eventually located, but some never return. Their mysteries remain unsolved, their loved ones trapped in uncertainty, and their names whispered like fading echoes through generations. These aren't just files stored in drawers, they are painful reminders that truth doesn't always surface no matter how long investigators search. Cold cases don't simply vanish. Instead, they grow heavier with each passing year, haunting detectives who could not resolve them, lingering in the memories of communities that refuse to forget, and tormenting families who wait endlessly for answers that never come. Tonight, we journey into the darkness of Australia's most chilling mysteries, cases that remain unresolved, unanswered, and unforgettable. Before we begin, I'd like to know, where are you watching from, and what time of day is it for you? Right now? Share it in the comments below. And if you want more true crime investigations told with the depth and detail they deserve, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Marion Barter, the teacher who vanished, 1997. In the middle of 1997, Marion Barter entered Sydney Airport. She was cheerful, carrying her bags, dressed as though life was about to start anew. To her children, she promised an adventure abroad, perhaps even a complete reinvention of herself. Yet Marion never came home. Days turned to weeks. Her bank account drained mysteriously. Her name had been quietly altered. And somewhere between her hopeful beginning and her last known steps, she disappeared, swallowed, it seemed, by the earth itself. For more than 20 years, her disappearance has unsettled police, terrified her family, and raised one of the most haunting questions in Australian criminal history. How can someone vanish so completely, in plain view, leaving behind only clues that deepen the mystery? Marion Barter was never the type of person anyone expected to go missing. Born in 1945, she grew into a kind, intelligent young woman with a passion for teaching and children. By the 1990s, she was a respected Gold Coast teacher. To colleagues, she was warm and creative. To her students, she was fair but firm, the kind of teacher remembered long after school years fade. Yet, beyond the classroom, she faced struggles familiar to many women: divorced, raising children, and searching for purpose in middle age. At 51, she reached a crossroads. Friends recalled how she longed for adventure, dreamed of travel, romance, and a life beyond routine. That dream was about to lead her across the globe, but it would also draw her into the shadows. In June 1997, Marion told her family she was flying to England. She was upbeat, excited, and eager for a new chapter. Her daughter Sally still remembers their last hug at the airport, Marion assuring her she'd return before Christmas. But soon, unsettling signs emerged. Just before leaving, Marion had changed. Her name to Florabella Natalia Marion Remakel, a name unknown to her family. By late June, her passport recorded a flight to the UK. In July, her return ticket was altered to an earlier date. Witnesses later claimed to have seen her back in Australia soon after. And then, silence. Her bank account began leaking funds, thousands withdrawn in small sums from ATMs across New South Wales. Her Medicare card was also used, but signatures on later records appeared inconsistent with hers. To her family, it seemed someone else was living as Marion while she had vanished. Police initially believed Marion had chosen to abandon her life. She was, after all, an adult entitled to independence. When Sally reported her mother missing, officers assured her, "Your mum probably just needed a break." But Sally refused to accept that. She knew her mother. She was certain Marion would never vanish without a word. Over time, troubling details emerged. Marion's name change linked her, unknowingly, to a man with a sinister past. A French national named Rick Bloom, also known as Remakel. He lived under many aliases and carried a record of deceiving women. Former partners described him as manipulative, a predator who charmed women before exploiting them. Could Marion have been one of his victims? For years, these suspicions circulated quietly, until a podcast changed everything. In 2019, journalist Allison Sandy and producer Brian Seymour launched The Lady Vanishes, a podcast focused solely on Marion's disappearance. What began as a detailed review quickly turned into a sprawling investigation. Dozens of women came forward, saying they too had been deceived by the same man. Listeners followed each weekly update, uncovering facts alongside Marion's daughter. Public pressure mounted. A case once buried for decades was suddenly national news again. The podcast revealed evidence long suspected by the family. Marion had indeed been in contact with Rick Bloom. She may have trusted him, perhaps even fallen for him. And then, after, leaving to begin her new life, she never came back. The attention forced authorities to act. In 2021, the New South Wales coroner opened an official inquest into Marion's disappearance. For the first time in years, her family sat in court as witnesses spoke. Rick Bloom was summoned. His testimony was evasive, often contradictory. He admitted knowing Marianne, admitted to multiple relationships with women, but denied harming her. Yet the inquest exposed his long history of aliases, manipulation, and his presence in Marion's life at the very moment she vanished. Despite rising suspicion, no charges followed. The case remains unsolved. Why did Marion adopt a name tied to Blum? Who drained her accounts after she disappeared? Why did authorities dismiss the case for so long despite Sally's pleas? And the most chilling question, what truly happened to Marion Barter after she walked into that airport in 1997? The coroner has yet to issue a final conclusion, but one fact is certain. Marion's disappearance was not an accident. For Marion's children, the pain is never ending. Sally has fought relentlessly for answers over 25 years, overcoming police neglect, public silence, and even skepticism from those who assumed Marion had chosen to leave. Instead, Sally became her mother's voice, refusing to let her story fade. Without her determination, Marion's case may have been forgotten. Now, it stands as one of Australia's most haunting cold cases. This mystery extends beyond one family's grief. It raises urgent questions about how missing person cases are managed, how easily trust can be manipulated, and how long injustice can linger before action is taken. In 1997, Marion Barter walked through Sydney Airport anticipating a fresh beginning. Nearly 3 decades later, her fate remains hidden. Someone, somewhere, still holds the answers. Until the truth emerges, her family's battle will not end. What do you believe happened to Marion? Did she place her trust in the wrong person? Was she silenced to keep secrets hidden? Or does another explanation remain buried in the shadows? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe for more true crime documentaries that ensure these stories are never forgotten. Megan Mulqueeney, The Girl Who Never Came Home, 1984, Canberra, June 28, 1984. It was a Thursday afternoon like many others. At about 12:15 p.m., 17-year-old Megan Mulqueeney clocked out of her job at Dixon's Florist inside Woden Plaza Shopping Center. She was bright, neatly dressed and carrying her bag, ready to head home after a routine shift. She walked to the bus stop nearby, a familiar route she had taken countless times. But that day, Megan never made it home. Witnesses last saw her, waiting at the stop. And then, without a trace, she vanished, never seen again. For almost 41 years, this mystery has haunted Canberra. How could a teenager disappear in daylight from a busy shopping hub without anyone noticing? And why, despite decades of investigation, has her family still not been given the answers they desperately need? Megan was only 17, just months away from finishing high school. She lived in Pearce, a well-established suburb of Canberra, and Wazia, widely liked among classmates and friends for her kind, gentle nature. She studied at Lake Ginninderra College, balancing her schoolwork with her part-time florist job at Woden Plaza. Mature beyond her age, she was dependable, disciplined, and trusted with responsibility. Her family remembers her love of music, fashion, and time spent with friends. She wasn't rebellious. She wasn't the type to run away. She was only a teenager, working hard toward her future, studying for exams, making plans, and standing on the edge of adulthood. That is what makes her disappearance so terrifying. Megan wasn't involved in any dangerous lifestyle. She wasn't considered at risk, and yet, on a normal weekday afternoon, she never came back. The timeline of June 28, 1984, is exact up until a critical moment. At 12:15 p.m., Megan finished her shift at Dixon's Florist inside Woden Plaza. She signed out, collected her belongings, and walked out of the shopping center. She then headed toward the bus stop nearby. Several witnesses later confirmed seeing her waiting there, and then nothing. She never boarded a bus. She never arrived home. When she failed to return that evening, her family grew anxious. At first there was hope. Perhaps she had gone to visit a friend. Maybe she had lost track of time. But as night stretched on, dread began to settle in. By the following morning, the truth was undeniable. Megan had vanished. Police launched an immediate search. Officers canvassed the plaza, speaking with shopkeepers, bus drivers, and commuters who had been present that afternoon. Some remembered spotting Megan. Others thought they had seen a vehicle parked near the stop, but no solid lead surfaced. In 1984, CCTV was virtually non-existent in Australia. Forensic tools like DNA profiling or mobile phone tracking did not yet exist. Investigators had almost nothing to work with. Initially, authorities wondered if Megan had run away. She was, after all, just 17. But her family dismissed the idea instantly. Megan had no reason to disappear voluntarily. She was close with her family, optimistic about her future, and committed to her studies. She left behind all her belongings: money, clothing, personal effects. Within days, the case shifted from a missing teenager to a suspected abduction. What makes Megan's case so unsettling is how ordinary it was. She disappeared in daylight, from a crowded location, surrounded by people. Megan was cautious, sensible, and not prone to reckless behavior. If she entered a car willingly, police believed it might have been because she recognized the driver. Still, they could not rule out the possibility of a stranger opportunistically targeting her at the bus stop. Canberra, though smaller in the 1980s, was not free from crime. Her case is often compared to the 1971 disappearance of 19-year-old Karen Rolston, who also vanished while waiting for a bus before being discovered in bushland. The parallels are chilling. Young women, public transport, sudden disappearance. Though no direct connection has ever been proven, the timing and geography continue to fuel speculation. Sadly, no physical evidence was ever recovered. Megan's body was never found, and no confirmed possessions were linked to her. By today's standards, the investigation was handicapped from the start. In 1984, Canberra's policing relied heavily on witness memory rather than science. Leads that might now be tracked carefully often slipped away. Another challenge was perception. Early on, many assumed she had chosen to run away, despite her family's insistence that she hadn't. That assumption may have slowed critical urgency during the first days of the search. At the time, Megan's disappearance dominated headlines. Her face appeared in newspapers and her story was broadcast on radio and TV. The idea that a teenager could vanish from Woden Plaza, a place where families shopped daily, shocked the community. For weeks, searches combed bushland, rivers, and suburbs. Posters were distributed. Appeals were made. Yet without progress, media attention faded. Still, her name never truly disappeared. On anniversaries, her family continued speaking to reporters, ensuring her story remained alive. Each year during National Missing Persons Week, The Australian Federal Police spotlighted Megan's case as one of Canberra's longest-running mysteries. Across 4 decades, no arrests have been made. Suspects have been examined and dismissed. Leads have dried up. In 2009, the AFP's National Missing Persons Coordination Center again highlighted her story, still calling it an active investigation while admitting the trail had gone cold. In 2024, marking 40 years since her disappearance, the Daily Telegraph revisited the case, interviewing relatives who continue to endure the agony of unanswered questions. For her family, the absence of closure is unbearable. Megan's case endures because it speaks to a universal fear, the ordinary moment that turns extraordinary. She was simply a girl leaving work, waiting for a bus, something millions of teenagers do without a second thought. Yet, for Megan, it became her last sighting. Her family has lived over 40 years in limbo. No body to lay to rest, no conviction, no justice. Only an empty chair at gatherings and the unrelenting question, what truly happened that afternoon? Her story is also a warning, how fragile everyday moments can be, and why old cases must never be abandoned. Advances in DNA, digital forensics, and public awareness mean that mysteries once thought impossible to solve might one day be cracked. Maria James, The Bookshop Mystery, 1980, Melbourne. On a quiet June day in 1980, 2 boys pushed open the door to their mother's bookshop in Thornbury, Melbourne. What they found inside scarred them forever and left a shadow over the city for decades. Their mother, Maria James, had been brutally attacked inside her own store. It should have been a case solved quickly. Instead, it became one of Victoria's longest-running cold cases. A story marked by institutional failure, mishandled evidence, and lingering questions. Maria James was 38 in 1980. To outsiders, she appeared to be a typical suburban mother. She had 2 sons, Mark and Adam, whom she adored and fiercely protected. Recently divorced, she faced financial struggles but remained determined to provide her children with stability. She had bought a small second-hand bookshop on High Street in Thornbury. The shop reflected her personality, warm, inviting, slightly cluttered, and filled with hidden gems for those who browsed. Behind the counter, Maria was friendly and approachable, often chatting with local visitors. She dreamed of rebuilding life after her divorce, of independence and resilience. But beneath her calm exterior, she carried heavy burdens. She had recently learned that Adam, her youngest son, who suffered from Tourette's syndrome, had been abused by a local priest. Maria was preparing to confront the church. She wasn't someone who stayed silent, not when her child's safety was on the line. That decision may have placed her in grave danger. June 17, 1980, began ordinarily. Maria dropped her sons at school, returned home briefly, and then opened her shop. Around lunchtime, she phoned her ex-husband to arrange care for the boys later. Her tone was normal, nothing unusual, but sometime between 11 a.m. and 12:30 p.m., something terrible occurred. Customers later recalled seeing Maria during that window. By early afternoon, her sons arrived home from school and walked into the shop. Inside, they found the aftermath of a violent attack. Their mother's life ended in the very store she had built. For the boys, it marked the start of lifelong trauma. For investigators, it should have been a straightforward case, but it wasn't. At first, detectives assumed the crime was personal. Maria had not been robbed. Her cash register was untouched. This wasn't a burglary gone wrong. It was targeted. Investigators questioned people in her circle. Neighbors, friends, customers. They examined her struggles, her divorce, finances, and her plan to challenge the priest. But almost immediately the investigation faltered. Evidence was collected carelessly. Crucial items weren't properly recorded. And in an era before DNA testing, the chain of custody wasn't treated with the seriousness expected today. One of the most haunting parts of Maria's case is not only the crime itself, but the failures surrounding it. When DNA testing became possible years later, her family urged police to examine samples from the crime scene. To their horror, they learned the samples had been contaminated. Some had been stored together with unrelated evidence. In other instances, samples were even misfiled, leading investigators to test material unrelated to Maria's murder. For decades, both detectives and the wider public assumed they had excluded certain suspects thanks to DNA tests. But the devastating truth later emerged. The samples they had been testing all along didn't even come from Maria's case. They belonged to someone else entirely. This catastrophic blunder meant that for years investigators had been pursuing false trails, ruling out people who should never have been cleared. By the time the mistake came to light, decades had slipped away. Witnesses were gone, memories had blurred, and the already fragile trail was colder than ever. Despite these failures, speculation about Maria's death has never stopped. Many remain convinced her murder was linked to her decision to confront a priest about her son's abuse, the very same day she died. Could her courage to speak out have cost her life? Over time, other survivors of clerical abuse came forward, reinforcing suspicions of cover-ups, silencing, and intimidation within the church. Others wondered if a man within Maria's own circle held a grudge or harbored an unhealthy obsession. Some theories suggested a passing customer could have been responsible, yet the brutality of the attack seemed too personal to fit the idea of a stranger. Without reliable forensics, every theory remained unproven. Initially, the case drew intense media attention. The image of a mother murdered in her small Thornbury bookshop struck a nerve across Melbourne. But as weeks turned into months without arrests, headlines faded. For Maria's sons, however, the horror never lessened. Mark and Adam grew up under the shadow of that day. They became relentless campaigners, pushing police for answers, speaking to reporters, and refusing to allow their mother's story to be forgotten. In later years, advances in DNA science offered a glimmer of hope that the case could finally be cracked. But the revelation about evidence contamination destroyed that optimism. Then, in 2017, the ABC podcast Trace reignited attention. Journalists dug into Maria's story, spotlighting the church abuse connection and exposing investigative failures. Much like the Lady Vanishes podcast revived Marion Barter's case, Trace pulled Maria's tragedy back into the national conversation, forcing uncomfortable questions upon both the church and law enforcement. Even so, no charges have ever been laid. Maria James's story is more than a single crime. It is a portrait of systemic failure. Failure by police who mishandled evidence. Failure by church leaders who protected abusers. Failure by a justice system that left two young boys without their mother and without answers. For over 4 decades, her sons have carried the weight of that injustice, still searching for truth even while knowing they may never find it. Her case stands as a solemn reminder. Every fragment of evidence matters, and every investigation carries the fate of families. The mishandling of Maria's case not only robbed her sons of closure, but also denied Australia justice. In June 1980, Maria James was savagely killed in her Thornbury bookshop. More than 40 years later, her sons still wait. Somewhere, someone knows what happened in that little store on High Street. The only question is whether the truth will ever be spoken aloud. Belinda Paisley, The Vanishing in the Blue Mountains, 1998, New South Wales. In October 1998, a young mother stepped outside her modest home in Katoomba, a quiet town in the Blue Mountains. She told a neighbor she would be back later. She never returned. Days became weeks. Weeks became years. Her home grew silent. Her children were left waiting, and her family was forced into a nightmare of uncertainty. The question echoed in the small community. How could Belinda Paisley simply disappear? Belinda, was only 19 when she vanished. On the surface, she seemed like any spirited young woman, bright, determined, juggling the challenges of early adulthood while raising 2 children of her own. She had grown up in a close-knit family, remembered as strong-willed and lively. But her teenage years carried struggles, health issues, low confidence, and adult responsibilities that arrived far too soon. When her grandmother passed away, Belinda inherited money. For a teenager, it felt like the start of a new chapter. She purchased a small home in Katoomba, creating a base for herself and her children. For a while, it looked like she had carved out stability, but her inheritance also drew attention. Independence, property, and sudden financial control brought people into her life, some well-meaning, others with darker intentions. In the months before her disappearance, Belinda's circle grew complicated. Friends and family later described their unease. She had become surrounded by people who took advantage of her generosity and youth. Some drained her emotionally, others financially. The house that should have been her safe space instead became a revolving door for acquaintances who created chaos and instability. Those closest to her urged her to distance herself. Belinda seemed torn, wanting companionship, yet sensing danger in the very people she allowed near. On October 26, 1998, she was last seen leaving her home. Witnesses later described her as appearing unsettled. That night, she never returned. Her absence was noticed immediately. Belinda would never willingly abandon her children. Alarmed, her family raised the alarm straight away. Police initially suggested she may have chosen to leave. After all, she was young, independent, and under stress. But her family rejected that theory outright. This was not a runaway. Searches followed. Her home, bushland, surrounding areas, but no sign of her was ever recovered. No belongings misplaced, no verified sightings afterward. It was as if she had simply vanished. The investigation quickly centered on her home and her social circle. Neighbors and friends were interviewed. Some described her as vulnerable to manipulation. Others whispered about intimidation, violence, and threats from people connected to her. There were stories of demands for money, of volatile arguments, of Belinda expressing fear. But without physical evidence, no body, no weapon, no crime scene, the investigation stalled. With time, chances were lost. Some men in her circle, later described in court as manipulative or violent, were never properly investigated in those critical first weeks. Rumors of altercations at her house, moments when she felt unsafe, emerged too late. Leads had gone cold. Her family was left with anguish and frustration, convinced authorities had not listened closely enough when it mattered. In 2012, more than a decade later, a coronial inquest was finally convened. It reopened old wounds but also brought long-awaited scrutiny. Across weeks of testimony, a chilling picture surfaced. Witnesses described Belinda's last months as turbulent, filled with conflict, pressure, and threats. Friends recalled her fear and her wish to cut ties with certain individuals. The coroner heard evidence of intimidation, manipulation, and violence in her life. In the end, the coroner concluded what her family had always believed. Belinda had almost certainly died at the hands of another, but with no body, no definitive proof, no single perpetrator could be named. Suspicion is not enough for charges. For her loved ones, it was devastating but validating. The system at last acknowledged she hadn't walked away. She hadn't abandoned her children. Something had been done to her, and yet the people who might hold the truth remain free. Even today, the unanswered questions linger in the Blue Mountains. Who silenced Belinda Peaslee? Was it someone inside her circle of friends, or someone who slipped through unnoticed? The silence around her disappearance still hangs heavy, and her children, now grown, continue to live with the absence that began on that October evening in 1998. Who was responsible for Belinda's disappearance? Did her inheritance and independence make her a target? Could earlier, stronger action by investigators have saved her? Belinda's case did not dominate national headlines at the time. In 1998, the story circulated locally, but was soon overshadowed by other news. Only years later, during the inquest, did her name return to the public eye. Her case resonated, especially with young women in regional Australia. The story of someone vulnerable, surrounded by people who didn't protect her, struck a chord. It highlighted the dangers of exploitation, how easy it is for the wrong people to take advantage of someone's trust. Belinda Peasley's disappearance is more than an unsolved mystery. It is a story about vulnerability, about how a young woman, trying to build a better life for her children, became isolated and failed by those around her. Her family has never stopped fighting. They have spoken at inquests, worked with journalists, and kept her memory alive in the hopes that someone, someday, will come forward. The legacy of her case is a painful reminder. It is not enough for authorities to simply record a disappearance. Vulnerable people need protection, urgent responses, and thorough investigations from the very first moment. In 1998, 19-year-old Belinda Peasley walked out of her home in Katoomba and never returned. More than 2 decades later, her family still waits for justice. Someone, somewhere, knows what happened to her. Was Belinda betrayed by those closest to her? Was she silenced because she tried to stand on her own? The truth remains hidden. Tell us what you think in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more true crime documentaries that keep these stories alive. Karen Rowland, The Bus Stop Mystery, 1971, Canberra. On March 26, 1971, a young woman, just 20 years old and heavily pregnant, stood waiting at a Canberra bus stop. She had plans that night, a movie with friends, a chance to escape her worries for a while, but she never made it there. Hours later, she was reported missing. Weeks later, her body was discovered in bushland outside the city. To this day, no one knows who was responsible for the disappearance and death of Karen Rowland, or whether her case is connected to 2 other unsolved mysteries that shook Canberra in the early 1970s. Karen Rowland was only 20 when her life was cut short. She was described as shy, gentle, and warm-hearted, with a soft-spoken nature. Her friends saw her as kind and sensitive, someone who cared deeply about others. But in early 1971, Karen was facing enormous challenges. Several months pregnant, she was preparing for motherhood at a very young age. For some, that might have been overwhelming, but Karen seemed determined to keep moving forward. She still went out with friends, still made plans, still carried hope for the future. To her family, she was cherished. They never imagined that. Letting her head out one Friday night would be the last time they saw her alive. That evening, Karen arranged to meet friends at a cinema in Civic, Canberra's city centre. She left her home in Pierce and walked to a bus stop on Melrose Drive. The bus should have arrived within minutes. Witnesses recalled seeing her waiting alone, neatly dressed, her demeanor suggesting she was looking forward to the night. But at some point, she vanished. Karen never boarded a bus. She never arrived at the cinema. She never returned home. Her absence was noted quickly, but at first it was treated as unusual rather than sinister. By the next day, she was officially reported missing. For 2 long months, there were no answers. Then on May 13, 1971, a grim discovery was made. Karen's body was found in bushland near Fairbairn Avenue, close to the Canberra airport. The area was remote, far from where she was last seen. Investigators confirmed foul play. The case, however, was hampered from the very beginning. Canberra in the early 1970s was a small city with a limited police force. There was no DNA testing, no CCTV, and few forensic tools. Detectives interviewed drivers, passengers, and locals. Some witnesses recalled a car pulling up near the bus stop and speculated Karen may have entered willingly, perhaps with someone she knew. Police considered the possibilities. Had she accepted a lift? Had she been forced into a vehicle? Without solid evidence, the trail went cold. Theories multiplied over the years. Perhaps she knew her attacker. Friends said she was cautious, unlikely to trust a stranger. If she entered a car, it may have been because she recognized the driver. But the timing of her disappearance also raised chilling questions. Around the same period, 2 other young women vanished in Canberra. In early 1971, Pamela Lawrence disappeared. In 1973, Marion Scholes went missing. All 3 cases remain unsolved. Could they have been victims of the same predator? Police never confirmed a link, but the similarities remain striking. Young women, sudden disappearances, a lack of evidence. Some believe Canberra in the early 1970s may have been haunted by a serial offender whose identity has never been revealed. Karen's case also reflects the limits of the era. Forensic evidence was sparse, and most leads relied on fading witness memories. By the time modern DNA science emerged, much of the original evidence had degraded or been lost. Opportunities to re-examine the case were slim. Her disappearance and death shocked Canberra. Parents warned daughters to be careful, and rumors spread quickly. But without an arrest, the headlines faded. Karen's story became part of the city's shadowy folklore, remembered mostly by detectives and her grieving family. More than 50 years later, Karen's murder remains unsolved. She was a young mother-to-be, waiting at a bus stop when her life was stolen. Her unborn child never born. Her family left without answers. Was she the victim of someone she trusted? Or was she caught in a string of connected disappearances that plagued the city? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more true crime documentaries that keep these stories alive.